Greetings and welcome everybody to another one of our Free Friday community classes right here on the Green Art channel. If you have not taken a moment to subscribe, please do that. Lets me know you're out there and you'll get a little ding every time a new class goes up. So this week we are going to be talking about herbalisms, plural, the different expressions of herbalism, right? This is something that folks ask me about a lot. So I think that it will be fun to just kind of riff on this and dissect it a little bit and see where it goes. So there are a lot of different terms that get thrown around herbalism as this kind of blanket term of working with plants in various different ways. I don't think we're going to get into all of them today, but hopefully give you an idea of at least how I think about herbalisms, right? And doing herbalisms, and maybe give you some food for thought, right? Some things to chew on. So first, let's define herbalism in the two sort of most common streams that I think get presented in the modern day, right? And that first path is clinical, and the second path we will call occult. And each of them have many different tributaries, right, within them. But we're going to simplify it and break it down into those two paths. So first we have this concept of clinical herbalism. And when you hear this term, when you hear somebody like myself refer to themselves as a clinical herbalist, there are some things that implies. First is that the person has a clinical education, right? They went to a formal school, they've gone through a formal syllabus and training with clinical practicum around the practice of herbal medicine. The second is that clinical herbalism focuses on the clinical. It focuses on the scientific, evidence-based, experience of plants, while it may be slightly informed by folk or historical or empirical or ancestral herbalism. Most of that stuff gets put on the back burner in favor of what are we looking at, what are we finding in the lab, what are we finding in research trials and clinical trials and all of that. And I eat that stuff up. I think people can sometimes be surprised that I read, medical journals and that I'm looking at current research around herbal medicines. But I do, because herbal wisdom is herbal wisdom, right? Whether it comes from that stream or a different stream, it all adds to the tapestry of my practice. So anything that I can learn more about a plant, whether it's something that they taught us in spirit flight 1,000 years ago, or something that they taught us by looking at their parts and principles in through a microscope. All of it is meaningful to me. All of it is communication. So clinical herbalism is going to focus on the clinical experience of herbalism, meaning that people seek out a clinical herbalist because of their education, their competence, and their confidence, and they are coming to them for clinical problems, right? They're coming to them for generally health or physical health or mental health issues, and sometimes they're doing that to support other kinds of medication they're taking, pharmaceuticals. Sometimes they're doing it to mitigate the negative side effects of more allopathic or standard Western medical treatment. Sometimes they're doing it in place of, as an alternative to standard medical treatment. I respect all of it. I will work with people coming in for any kind of thing. I do work in a clinic, so my professional herbal practice is quite clinical, at least on the surface, right? And so we have that aspect. And then we have the occult. And unless I hopefully don't forget to tell you this, I don't see a big difference between the two, right? We could talk about unweaving herbalism into what is clinical and what is occult, but in my practice, I see them as the exact same thing. And that's an important thing, and I don't want to forget to say it, so I'm going to say it now. So the occult aspect of herbalism, when we talk about occult herbalism, we are talking about the hidden secrets, mysteries of plants, the things that they don't obviously show, the things that we have to work for, the things that we have to relate to or connect with them through meditation, spirit flight, ritual, sitting with them, right? And the occult properties have been expounded by different cultures and traditions and teachers over the years since time immemorial. one that we could easily bring up as probably one of the more well-known aspects of occult herbalism is the Paracelsian doctrine of signatures, right? That the way a plant looks, the color of their flowers, the number of petals, the formation of the plant, the way they smell, the way they taste, the way they make us feel, the way their aroma and taste moves through the body, the type of bioregion they grow in, where they like to grow, when they grow, when they die back. All of that is communication in occult herbalism. All of that stuff means something. All of it means from plants, according to doctrine of signatures, the same things that the look on another human person's face mean, right? That we can convey our internal mysteries through our external expressions. And that is doctrine of signatures. And it's just one tiny aspect of what occult herbalism is, but it's the most well-known thing. I think everyone has heard of it. And it gives us some insight into how we are connecting with plants person to person to gain their trust, to gain their secrets, to get their initiations, rather than cutting them, taking them into a lab, cutting them apart, dissecting them, seeing what makes them tick, right? They are two very different approaches that are ultimately going towards the same goal, which is knowing something about plants and knowing something about who plants are and knowing something about how the introduction of a plant presence into the human experience, whether it's on the clinical side through herbal medicine or the occult side through working with plant spirits, will create change in the human person. Like that's ultimately what we're really curious about. If I work with this plant, how will I change? What will it add to, the cauldron that is me? So it's very interesting. And so those are the two main paths. And again, within each of those paths, there are a bunch of different little subsects and little ways that we can wander deeper into the woods. But ultimately, that's it. And I think the way that we tend to present herbalisms in the modern day is like, pick one, right? You can either be a functional medicine herbalist doing very clinical work, or you can be an occult, spiritual, folkloric herbalist doing things that way, but you can't do both. And if you've been around for any length of time, we are going on 4 years of me putting these classes up every single Friday. You have heard me say ad nauseum that I don't agree with that. I think they're the same thing. I think that we can hold the occult and hold the clinical, one in each hand, and only go deeper into our understanding of who the plants are, again, because they're just more communication. I take huge issue with a lot of the ways that true clinical allopathic herbalism does things, because it's non-atomistic, it reduces plants to their good for, to their parts, and oftentimes the medicine that results from clinical research is isolated concentrated extracts of specific plant constituents, right? So an example would be turmeric or ashwagandha. Turmeric, when it runs through the clinical gamut, we think, oh, it's the curcumin that's the active principle in the plant. So let's isolate the curcumin, fill a capsule up with nothing but curcumin, and give that to people, right? I have a huge problem with that. Ashwagandha, we can run it through the clinical trials and say, oh, it's the wadamnicides that are the active constituents. So let's extract them and put them in a capsule and put a registered trademark at the end, right? Sensoril, I'm looking at you, and give that to people. I disagree with that wholeheartedly, because when we're holding occult spiritual herbalism, on the other hand, we say there's more to the plant than just their chemical physio-botanical constituents. There's a spirit, there's a wisdom, and we also understand through empirical experience and ancestral plant experience that when we isolate one part of the plant, that's when people start having side effects, right? That's when people taking a curcumin extract start getting dizzy when they stand up, or low blood pressure, or too thin of blood. But when the person takes the entire turmeric plant, there are other less important or negligible constituents in the plant that help prevent those side effects from happening in the first place, right? So I have my issues with it, don't get me wrong, and I certainly have my issues with it when people try to plug herbal medicine into the Western medical complex way of doing things, right? The industrial medical complex that is Western medicine. I don't like that at all. Herbs don't play well in this system. They don't work in the way that we want pharmaceutical medicines to work. We don't give people enough time for in that system for herbs to do what they really do. And this is why, one big difference that you will see between somebody who does clinical only and a more spiritual or occult style is how much time are they spending with their clients, right? A clinical herbalist will sometimes spend 20 to 30 minutes, just like a doctor. If you go to a naturopath, a functional medicine person, in and out, especially if they're billing insurance. You go to a spiritual herbalist, a cult spiritual herbalist, 90 minutes, 2 hours. I've seen herbalists spend 4 hours with people. I've spent 4 hours with people. So there's a difference that you can see. So then another way that we can break herbalisms down, that's the main two, and that's what we have to consider, one or the other or both, is how we take which of those paths we walk, what are we going to do with it? So whether it's the clinical or the occult or a little bit of both, there's 3 ways that I break this down: spiritual, vocational, and folk, right? And I think all of them are important, and I think all of them deserve some airtime here. So let's give them some airtime. So the spiritual, this is the kind of herbalism that is done by people who are working with plants for spiritual purposes. They are working with plants to grow as people, to learn about nature, to connect with nature, to engage in rituals, to shed things they don't want to carry around anymore, to do personal work. That their work with plants is part of their spiritual practice, just like prayer, meditation, communion, certain rituals are part of other people's, right? And they might do all those things. But I like to single out that working with plants can be a bona fide and effective spiritual practice, because the people that are out there allowing the plants into their spiritual practice are the ones that are really getting a lot of stuff done, right? They're really making leaps and bounds in ways that people who try to do everything on their own or do things only with the support of other humans, they won't have. The plants have a perspective, a history, an opinion, and a set of virtues that is so radically different from humans that it can only inspire us to grow in ways that we can't grow if we don't have that help, right? So there's the spiritual folks. Then we have the vocational folks. Vocational folks are people who do herbalism as a vocation, as a profession. And this actually splits in 2 again. We have clinical herbalists who go to school, get the clinical experience, get the stamp and the piece of paper, and now they're an herbalist so they can rightfully, confidently and competently and safely practice herbal medicine. Then we have people who are more interested in the occult herbalism, and there is no one to tell them when they are done studying, because they're never done studying, right? We never get to finish. That's the point. And the vocation of occult herbalism happens organically. We cannot step up and present ourselves as a cult herbalist. It doesn't work. There's nothing that we can bring to the table to back that up, right? What happens, and what has ancestrally happened since time immemorial, is that people who are in these deep personal relationship with plants, to whom the plants have revealed their green mysteries, their occult, their hidden secrets, those people will, by nature of being in possession of those secrets, attract people. People in their communities will perceive that they have wisdom, knowledge, connection that is helpful to the community, right? So rather than somebody finishing school and saying, I'm an herbalist. The occult herbalist does all the hard work and eventually is recognized organically by their community based on what they have worked for and what they have studied and what they have experienced. And that comes through efficacy, right? Where confidence and competence comes from the clinical study, efficacy comes from the occult. And we see this in many traditions over and over, that if someone is not effective as an herbalist, the community will stop supporting them as an herbalist, right? So we really have to be in deep relationship with the plants in order to make sure that what we do works. Again, I do both. I have a massive amount of clinical education behind me, but my practice is incredibly occult. And I didn't step into my herbal practice after I finished school. I stepped into it after the plants told me that I could work with plants, right? And this is something I cover in other classes. So spiritual, vocational, and then folk. And folk is people are not bringing the plants in super intensely to their spiritual practice, and they're certainly not working with plants as a vocation, as a profession, but plants play a role in their everyday folk practices, the everyday little charms and taboos and superstitions that they embody, the herbs that they add into soups at certain time of year, the herbs that they hang above their door for protection at certain times of year, the herbs that are connected with maybe the religion or the spiritual tradition they connect to. It's very folkish, right? It's coming from folklore, story, mythology, ancestral ways, and familial ways. It's the things that we learn from our parents and grandparents and we keep doing because they work and they feel good, right? So we have that spiritual, vocational, and folk. And again, I do all three. You can do all of this at once. This idea that there's some separation between being able to practice herbalism as a vocation and also being able to hold the folky spiritual aspects, that they somehow can't go together, is bullshit. I don't like it, and I don't really like when I hear other people say that, right? And people do say that. They'll say, oh, if you are into the wooey spiritual side of plants, we can't respect you as a clinical herbalist, right? Because you've gone out into the weeds. Or if you were more in the plant spirit wooey community of people working with herbs and you have a clinical education, people will say, oh, you're not intuitive. You don't have an intuitive connection to the plants because of your clinical education. I can't disagree enough. Again, because of my personal experience, right? I have over 12 years of clinical experience, including clinical rotations and mentorships and going through formal programs. But I think that my work speaks mostly to the spiritual, mostly to the occult, because I've found a way to be informed by both things. I am so hungry for herbal lore to be brought deeper and deeper into the green mysteries that I will take what they give from whatever angle they give it and let it add to my relationship and my practice with them. So moving forward, we get to think about this. What is most interesting to me, the clinical side of things, the occult side of things? And if both, what does it look like when I do both? Where do I feel pulled? The spiritual practice of herbalism, the vocational practice of herbalism, the folk practice of herbalism, which, by the way, doesn't get a lot of cred. In fact, I've never really seen anybody else break herbalism down into these three parts like I do, spiritual, vocational, and folk, because whatever kind of earth-based, animistic, pagan-y thing you might be doing, you're already working with plants, I guarantee it, right? There's already sacred trees, sacred woods, specific plants, specific incenses, drinks that are made from specific plants. You're already doing folk herbalism by practicing the religion of the folk, right? It's very cool. Vocational is definitely the hardest one. It's the one that requires the most amount of work and dedication. It's the easiest to present yourself as being an herbalist and the hardest to be an herbalist, right? At least an effective one. To me, even vocational herbalism is a spiritual calling and one that is all-consuming, and it should be all-consuming. It cannot be a hobby. right? If it's a hobby, um, when you get treated by an herbalist who is a hobby herbalist, you will receive hobby level of results. Just leave it at that. So hopefully some things to chew on. Hopefully this will bring up some questions, some self-reflection, some ideas in you. The clinical and the occult, the spiritual, the vocational, and the folk, all of it is valid. All of it is important. Everybody should be connecting to plants in some way, whether it's the folk, the vocational, or the spiritual. There's room for all of us. And the plants are great teachers, have so much to give. With that, I'll send you out with blessings of prosperity and peace. See you next time.